The MLB Trade Deadline is officially to a close. And man, oh man, was it a crazy one. Some teams came out the other side way better, some worse, but good. And then some, it was just an absolute disaster. We're going to grade every team based on their trade deadline, how they did, improving the roster either for now or in a few years. Let me know in the comment section. What do you think the most impactful trade is going to be? And let me know what you would rate your squad's trade deadline. Leave a like down below, subscribe to the channel, and let's get it going. So let's kick things off with the Baltimore Orioles. Of course, the top team in the American League East, and I think they built on it. They added Zach Eflin and Trevor Rogers, two pretty good starting pitchers. Of course, we know that depth has been an issue. They've had lots and lots of injuries to that staff. So Zach Eflin, I like quite a bit. Him coming over from the Rays is a good addition. Now, Trevor Rogers, of course, an all-star a couple of years back. They actually had to give up quite a bit in order to land him from the Marlins, which I think they made out maybe on the better hand. They had to trade Connor Norby and Kyle Stowers in order to get Trevor Rogers, who has not been fantastic this year. But I think we've seen, and we'll talk about later on, the starting pitcher market was a lot more expensive than a lot of us would have presumed. They made a couple trades with the Phillies. They added two relievers, Seranthony Dominguez and Gregory Soto, two guys that have had really good years in the past, but have struggled a bit this season. And then otherwise, Eloy Jimenez, Christian Pache. So depth. Talk about Pache, good outfielder. Eloy Jimenez, who's not quite been himself as of late, but we've seen him have these hitting tools. So I think maybe now that he's something to play for, he could be fired up a bit. Overall, I think it was a good deadline for Baltimore. The rich get richer, and I got to give them an A grade. I like what they did, and they didn't have to give up too much for it. Couple prospects, but they've got one of the most enriched farm systems. It's a win now system, and I like what Baltimore did here. Moving on to Boston. Now, the Red Sox currently find themselves fighting for one of the wild card slots in the American League, and Boston didn't do a whole lot. They got Luis Garcia from the Angels, Danny Jansen. Another in-division trade. Saw a lot of on this trade deadline. Quinn Priester, Lucas Sims, and James Paxton. So Garcia and Sims, two guys that are going to help out a fairly dreadful Boston bullpen at the moment. Paxton has already made a start. Of course, Big Maple was just a Red Sox a few years ago. And, you know, they didn't give up a ton, and they didn't get a ton. Just like we've been talking about with the offseason, they haven't made that big splash. And I don't think Boston needs to necessarily right now, because I don't think they're going to win right now. They could get into the playoffs with how they've been, but I don't know if they're good enough to really beat, you know, like a Baltimore, a New York, a Cleveland in a series. So I don't hate it. I don't love it. I'll give them a C grade. I think they could have served to try a little bit harder, but overall, they kind of stayed put. They didn't get a whole lot better. They didn't really get worse, of course. We're going to move on now to New York. The Yankees, big splash, maybe the biggest trade, one of the bigger trades, Jazz Chisholm, of course, coming from the Miami Marlins. And I think the Yankees made out like bandits on it. And they didn't have to give up a ton. Agustin Ramirez, Jared Cerna, and Abraham Ramirez. You know, two guys that are 19 and 20 in the Yankees system. For Jazz Chisholm, who's had injury problems plague his, you know, pretty young career at this point. But we've seen really good splashes from him, and he's finally staying on the field this year. And, of course, we've already gotten a taste of Jazz. You know, in his first 3 games, he's hit 4 home runs, 2 multi-homer games back-to-back. He provides a spark into that lineup, which they desperately need, some athleticism, which they could definitely use, and versatility. I mean, Jazz Chisholm came up as a middle infielder, moved to the outfield when the Marlins needed him to, and now he's been playing third base for the Yankees. So, pretty good. He made a nice play last night. So I like that so far. Then Mark Leiter Jr. from the Cubs, reliever out of the pen. I think he's pretty good. He's going to help them for sure. And Eniel De Los Santos as well. I think it wasn't a groundbreaking deadline. I think the lineup could serve for a little bit more bolster. Of course, you still look at it, it's kind of the Aaron Judge and Juan Soto show. And even if Jazz is great, it's the Aaron Judge, Juan Soto, and Jazz Chisholm show. I think they could use a little bit more depth within that lineup, but they definitely got better. I'm going to give them a B for now. They could have made a couple more moves for their pitching, but that's what they've got. The Tampa Bay Rays, they traded everybody. There's a couple teams here that moved almost their whole roster. Let's just list out some of the big ones. Isaac Paredes, Randy Arozarena, Aaron Savale, Phil Maton, or Mathen, apparently I spelled it wrong, Jason Adams, Zach Eflin, Sharon Armstrong. They traded some big names there. Of course, Isaac and Randy Arozarena. Isaac, a back-to-back All-Star these past couple of years. Randy Arozarena, maybe the face of the franchise being moved. A lot of movement, but I think they're still good enough to contend for the playoffs this year. I mean, they still have Yandy Diaz. They have guys there. They did not trade Brandon Lau, although it looked like they might have. They got back Christopher Morel, who is a more than capable player. He just never quite reached that next level with the Cubs. But again, just like Jazz, he's already hit 2 home runs for the Rays. He's looking pretty good. And a lot of it is going to be guys for the future. You look with the Dylan Lesko acquisition. I think that's a good pickup. Aiden Smith, who they got from Seattle in the Randy Arozarena trade. I think the Rays made out pretty well. Now, if you talk about as a franchise as a whole, for a fan base, I think this is very difficult to go and trade all your big stars. Isaac, Randy, Eflin played pretty well there. Of course, Aaron Savale never really clicked as a Ray, but they move out a lot of familiar names. Rays are like a college team. That's the best way I can put it. You know, they're like a good, competitive, not championship-winning college football squad, but they just shuffle in new players every 4 years, and somehow they still manage to do pretty well. I'll give them a B grade. I think they got some pretty nice prospects back, but again, it's tough when you trade most of the major league talent that you've got rostered. Now, Toronto, I really like their deadline. They did not move the big names. Of course, Vlad Guerrero Jr. is still a Blue Jay. Bo Bichette is still a Blue Jay. The latter's probably a bit more difficult considering the career low season and the injury that he's currently sustaining. It wasn't going to happen, and I think they realized, especially with how good Vlad has been of late, that's a guy that you want to get long-term. Make him a Blue Jay for life, essentially. So hopefully they are going down that path, but they did move some pretty big names. Yusei Kikuchi, Danny Jansen, Amy Garcia, Nate Pearson, Justin Turner, Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, Kevin Kiermaier, Kevin Biggio, of course, a couple months back. They got rid of a lot of players and they added some pretty damn good prospects, especially with the trade with Houston in order to get Yusei Kikuchi in an Astros uniform. They got Jake Bloss and Joey Luperfido. 2 really good youngsters. I love that trade for the Blue Jays, who obviously are not going to get into the playoffs this year. They're really setting up for the future, and they added a ton of depth. A lot of infielders, which I think is interesting. I think the big plan is Vlad's the guy that you do decide to pay, considering there seems to be some issue within ownership in paying these guys. So if you do trade Bo Bichette next year, he has a better season. He's a half-year rental for whoever wants to pick him up. I think that might be the plan. I'm going to give the Blue Jays an A. I thought they did a really good job at this trade deadline. Moving on to the American League Central, the Chicago White Sox. They moved the guys that they definitely were going to, but they did not move the guys that we thought they might. Garrett Crochet and Luis Robert Jr. are still members of the Chicago White Sox after the trade deadline. And we'll talk about that in a second. They did move Michael Kopech, Eric Fedde, Tommy Pham, Eloy Jimenez, Paul DeYoung, Tanner Banks. Again, the guys that they definitely should have traded. Eric Fedde's on a 2-year deal. He's been pitching really well this season. He was an excellent trade bait. That's what you want to do when you're a bad team. Get guys that teams want and get prospects for it. Eloy Jimenez was a salary dump. A lot of guys on expiring deals, like Michael Kopech was going to be a free agent anyway, same as Tommy Pham. And they added a couple interesting names there for sure. I like some of the prospects here. Miguel Vargas, of course, has been in an MLB uniform a little bit with the Dodgers. Never quite worked out for them as they continue their search to find middle infield help. But, of course, we talk about the big things, Kopech and Robert Jr. I don't think Robert Jr. is going to happen. I just didn't see it. You didn't need to. He's under team control for a handful more of years, and he hasn't stayed healthy, which is a big thing when you're talking about a guy long-term instead of a rental. Teams want to make sure that they're going to actually have the player they're trading a pretty good amount of prospects for, and he hasn't had an amazing 2024 either. So I don't think the prospect haul is quite what they wanted. And then Garrett Crochet kind of tightened the constraints on what the White Sox could do, because him and his team essentially said, if you're going to trade for me, you have to extend me after my arbitration years conclude, I think after 2026, or else I'm not going to pitch in the postseason, and I will not go out of the bullpen as well. His team thinks it's the right idea. I'm not sure how the White Sox feel about it, but I definitely think that made it more difficult for something to happen. I got to give him a C grade. I think they never needed to trade Crochet and Robert, although I don't know if you're ever going to get more of a haul than you would with Garrett Crochet this season. He's been a top 3 Cy Young pitcher in the American League. The Cleveland Guardians, now they didn't do a ton. They are, of course, one of the best teams in baseball, but they do have some holes. That rotation definitely needs help, and they brought in Alex Cobb as the main guy to help fix that, I guess. Cobb has been around for a while, and I do like him. He was an all-star just in 2023. He's yet to pitch this season, although he's on the cusp of coming back, so he should be in that rotation pretty soon here. Lane Thomas is a big add. Outfield help from the Nationals. Of course, Washington has not been too relevant the past couple of seasons, so he's been a bit under the radar, but he's played some great baseball. Bit of a down season compared to last year, but I think they got him kind of for a steal, although Alex Clemmie is a pretty big prospect to give up. We'll see. I think it's not going full deep. I'm going to give Cleveland a B because they definitely got better, but they didn't go above and beyond, which I think is a little unfortunate considering you see that a lot with smaller market teams. They kind of sit and hope what they have is good enough. We'll talk about that with another AL Central team here pretty soon. The Detroit Tigers. Of course, Tarek Skubal was their big name on the market. I never thought it was going to happen. I thought it would have taken equity in the team to land Tarek Skubal. I think he's maybe the best pitcher in baseball right now, and he's under team control for a handful more of years. Would have been very difficult to pry him away. Good move from Detroit not trading him. Now, there are some guys that you would have expected to be traded that weren't, that are still rostered, but they did get rid of the main ones. Jack Flaherty, of course. Excellent move. 1-year deal. He pitched really, really well. Again, a bit under the radar. If he was playing for the Dodgers the whole time, people would have known about it. But I see so many tweets that are like, wow, Flaherty's been having a great season. Yeah, he has been. Nobody's been talking about it. But to be honest, I don't know if Lorenzo and Sweeney are quite enough of a haul, even for a half-year rental of Jack Flaherty. We'll see. But I don't know. I thought they could have got a little bit more out of that trade. Otherwise, they sent Shafeen to Texas. Carson Kelly, he got traded also to the Rangers, and Mark Canha to the Giants. Not a ton of movement for the Tigers. I'll give them a C because I think it's a great decision that they held on to Tarek Skubal, but a lot of their big plan going forward, the guys just aren't quite ready. So, yeah, kind of stay put, average. Kansas City Royals. Been great this year. They find themselves right in the hunt for a playoff spot in a very competitive American League, and I thought they did well. Of course, their hitting could always improve a bit, but it's the bullpen that's been the killer. The rotation has been top of the line when you look at Brady Singer, Cole Reagans, and Seth Lugo, and Michael Wacha, too. He's no slouch as a number 4-5 guy, and they did add Mike Lorenzen, who should find some starts, but probably be looking at a bullpen role come postseason time should Kansas City make it. But the big things here, Hunter Harvey and Lucas Erceg. Two relievers that they added. Erceg I like a lot. A big under-the-radar pick from Oakland. He has excellent peripherals. Fires the ball 99 miles an hour. I like him a lot. So he's going to be a big help to that Royals bullpen. Harvey should be a decent addition, not having quite the season he has the last couple as the Nationals closer. And then Paul DeJong should get some PT in there as well. He played third base the other day. Of course, Miguel Garcia is in there as well, but he has a bit more flexibility. Not bad. I'm going to give Kansas City a B. They definitely got better and improved their biggest hole. Moving on over to the Minnesota Twins, the team that did the least when they definitely needed something. They add Trevor Richards and they traded out Jay Harry. They added in one relief pitcher who's not been excellent. I think he's solid. Trevor Richards isn't a bad pickup, but when you look at a team that's had injury concerns with their stars, Royce Lewis, Carlos Correa, knock on wood, but Byron Buxton's been fairly healthy this season. Jose Miranda, he's missed time. Depth could have been nice, but the big problem has been pitching. You look at injuries that have been sustained within the bullpen. Brock Stewart, one of their biggest names last year, just went down on the IL once again. And in that rotation, Pablo Lopez is figuring it out. Obviously not nearly having the Cy Young caliber year that he was last season. Bailey Ober's been sharp. We've been seeing some good starts out of Joe Ryan. He almost was kind of like a fringe all-star pick. Simeon Woods-Richardson has been a bit surprising there as well. But overall, you would have liked to see them go after somebody here, someone to help out that rotation. You look at what finally helped them win their first playoff game and series last year. It was their pitching. Having the two-headed monster of Sonny Gray and Pablo Lopez, and I just don't know if you feel as confident about that heading into this postseason. So I'm going to give them a D. It would be an F, but the team's good enough that they didn't have that many holes. But it's a slap in the face when ownership balks at potential to get better players, all to save a couple bucks. It's really, really fucking annoying. Moving on to Houston. Interesting team. They've made a huge rebound from where they were at the beginning part of the season. They currently find themselves, I think, winning the American League West. It's kind of teeter-tottering between them and Seattle, but I believe they currently sit atop the AL West division. And they're going to get some guys back, like Kyle Tucker within that lineup. I'm not worried. The Astros can hit. I think they proved that. But what they have not been able to do, that they have in years past, is get great starts out of the rotation. They, I believe, find themselves about number 20. Is that right? 18, it looks like, in terms of rotational ERA this year, which it's been stellar, elite. These past, 7 years that they've made it to the Championship Series or World Series. And they add Yusei Kikuchi, but they gave up a lot for him. Jake Bloss and Joey Luperfido, who we already talked about. And Kikuchi's been having a very interesting season. He had a great start to the 2024 campaign. He's striking out a lot of batters. He's not walking that many. He's improving on those skills, but he is getting hit hard. He's got a 270 opponent batting average. I think the Astros must clearly see something in him. We've seen Houston really revitalize pitchers. Talk about Charlie Morton, Garrett Cole, Justin Verlander in these latter years have turned him even a Cy Young season in 2022. So I think they have a lot of talent to help their pitchers, but I think they could have done more if they're clearly in a win right now stage. When they've got guys like Kyle Tucker, he's up for free agency, Alex Bregman. I'm going to give him a D. I didn't think they did enough, and I think their already depleted farm system got hurt even more to add a solid arm into that rotation. I don't love it for Houston, but they did get a bit better for now. Moving on over to the Angels, who have really blown my mind these past couple of years. Of course, last year, they made headlines in buying at the deadline about 500-ish in hopes to get into the postseason and make a last-ditch effort at maybe re-signing Shohei. Say, hey, we made it to the playoffs once. Come back, sign here long-term, spend the rest of your career here. It did not work out. Failed miserably. They lost prospects, and pretty much everybody they got, they DFA'd or traded later on. And here they go in a spot where they've got interesting guys like Taylor Ward. They've got Luis Renifo. They don't move him. They don't trade him. Tyler Anderson, all-star this year. Believe he's going to be a free agent at the end of the year. They don't trade him. They do let go of Carlos Esteves, which they got a decent package from the Philadelphia Phillies for him. Of course, he's been a good reliever this year. I don't get why you decide to not move the guys that teams would pay for. I don't get it. Brandon Drury, there's another one. I mean, there's so many guys the Angels could have traded, and they let go of 3 players throughout the year. I hate it. F for the Angels. I can't stand what they're doing to this organization. They're in a tough spot. I get it. There's so much money tied up to Trout and Rendon, 2 guys that barely play anymore. But this is not how you do it, especially when MLB.com ranks them as one of the worst farm systems in baseball. How do you plan on getting better when you don't add anybody else? It blows my mind, truly. Moving on over to the A's, Oakland, Sacramento next year, Las Vegas a few years. If that happens, it's not officially confirmed yet. But they move a couple guys, Lucas Ursig that we talked about, Paul Blackburn, and J.D. Davis, which was prior to a month or so back, moving him to the Yankees. And they added a couple interesting prospects. I thought they did well. Mason Barnett, Jared Dickey, Cade Morris. I like those additions. I think they made out pretty well. The problem with Oakland comes in when you look at who didn't they trade. Mason Miller, I agree. Don't trade him. Why would you? He's so young. That's the kind of guy that you want to hold on to. But Brent Rooker, I don't really understand why they wouldn't try and move him. Rooker's already about 30 years old. He's pretty much a pure DH, so he should hold on to his main skill, that being the bat. He's been one of the best hitters in baseball this year. And again, you probably don't know that because it's with Oakland. It's the A's. But he's been like Marcell Ozuna level as a DH. He's been excellent. And somehow they just don't move him. He has a couple more years of arbitration. He's going to be an A for a little bit here. But I just don't see them being competitive within that span. So I don't get it. I'm going to give him a C because I like the haul that they got back from the guys they did trade, but I think it's a missed opportunity, ultimately. Seattle, of course, finds himself very competitive within the American League West, and they've not been able to hit this year. They're finally coming around, but even still, they rank 20th in all of baseball. It's all been their pitching. The rotation, number 2 in terms of ERA, and their bullpen hasn't been quite as sharp, but still number 12. Pretty good. Better than average. And they add Randy Arozarena, Justin Turner, 2 nice right-handed bats. Now, Randy has not had an outstanding year, but he's coming around. He was hot to end off his Rays tenure, and he comes into Seattle now in an interesting spot with Julio Rodriguez injured for a couple weeks, same as J.P. Crawford. So I like those additions. Yimi Garcia, very underrated pickup from Toronto. He's been excellent. I really like that addition to the bullpen. And they did have to give up a couple pretty nice prospects in there. Also Ty France, which I think it was about time. I'm just not sure if that ballpark is really fitting to his talents, but I like it. I think Seattle did well. I'm going to give them a B. And if they can start to hit, if they move up to league average, a little bit above league average, watch out, because this team can pitch like nobody else. Texas Rangers, kind of interesting spot that they found themselves in. They're 8 games back from a playoff spot right now, which I wouldn't say is really too competitive. That's going to take a decent fight to get back in there. And they didn't really sell, didn't really buy. They didn't really give up a ton of prospects. They traded Mike Lorenzen. They added Carson Kelly, Andrew Shafine. They kind of just retooled. They're starting to get healthy. Max Scherzer came back a couple weeks ago. It sounds like Jacob deGrom's going to come back at some point. Their position players are getting healthier. Hopefully they can go on a hot streak. Of course, Corey Seager, Adolis Garcia, Marcus Semien, those three, you just haven't seen the kind of production that you did last year, and that's why they find themselves in third place right now. I'm going to give them a C. I don't know if staying put is the right decision. I don't know if it's average. You know, they know they're good enough to compete. They don't want to tear it down, but they do have some guys that are going to be free agents at the end of this year or next year. Your Nate Eovaldi's, Kirby Yates, Max Scherzer's, and they decided to keep them. So we'll see how that turns out. C grade for them. The Braves did not do a lot. They add back Jorge Soler, who of course, you know, was the World Series MVP in 2021. Eddie Rosario came back a little bit ago. They didn't re-add Jock Peterson, but they're kind of reforming that 2021 team. Otherwise, Luke Jackson comes in. They didn't make a ton of moves. Another postseason hero, Tyler Matzik, who's been having a rough season, he moved out. The Braves, quite simply, are not hitting like they did last year. They're one of the greatest offensive forces ever in 2023, and they have not been that this year. Of course, no Acuna for the most part, and almost everybody not named Marcell Ozuna is hitting worse than they did last year. In some cases, significantly. But to their benefit, the rotation is maybe one of the best in baseball, at least the top end of Reynaldo Lopez, Chris Sale, and Max Fried. I don't hate it. They're a good team, but I think they could have used something. I got to give them a C grade. I think they'll come back. Matt Olson hit 2 home runs today. They have all the talent in the world to do so, but I would have liked to see a little extra effort to kind of surge that team across and really help them, because they're quite a ways from the Phillies right now. They could theoretically lose a spot within the playoffs because the National League is getting competitive now for those wild card slots. I don't even know how many players. That's what, 20 that the Marlins got in? Of course, a lot of prospects, a lot of young guys, and then they traded out Tanner Scott, Jazz Chisholm, Trevor Rogers, Brian De La Cruz, AJ Puck, Luis Arraez, like months ago. They did well. They added some nice names in here for sure. They got a haul back from the Padres in the Tanner Scott trade. Of course, he's been an all-star this year. He's been really good as the Fish's closer, and they got a haul for him, which is great. They did well on the Trevor Rogers trade. Also great. I thought they could have done better on the Jazz Chisholm trade, but overall, they're not going to compete this year. Clearly, I do see a mistake. Josh Bell, he is out. He's been traded. He's certainly not in. The Marlins made very clear of that when they put him on waivers. But kind of the same with the Rays, except the Marlins will not be competitive this year. It's going to help for later. The Marlins are really bolstering up that farm system, which is what they should be doing. But I don't like what they're doing as a franchise. I don't like it when you're trading away all your players here. Again, you talk about a team that was in the postseason last year, and they face a month of adversity. They trade Luis Arraez, and a couple months later, they trade nearly everybody else. But they still have Jesus Luzardo. They managed to keep him. I'll give them A grade, actually. That being said, I do like their prospect haul. I just wish maybe they wouldn't give up so quickly, but given their decision, they made out pretty well. They got some nice youngsters back. Moving on to the New York Mets, who have really found themselves in a competitive spot here when it looked kind of bleak mid-season. Now they're looking really good. And they add in Jesse Winker, Paul Blackburn, which I like those two additions. Winker's having a rebound season. He's always been a crusher of right-handed hitters, and I think he's going to fit in well to that Mets lineup. Paul Blackburn, former All-Star, I think 2022 with Oakland. Solid lefty arm in that rotation. The rotation, which has been pitching a lot better than expected. Sean Manaea has been pretty good this year. Luis Severino. Not quite the Kodai Senga replacement. Of course, he's going to be out for the remainder of the season, it sounds like. But I thought the Mets did okay. They didn't give up a ton. And again, what I like here, they're not necessarily going to get to the same tier as the Phillies, the Dodgers. So you don't necessarily want to trade everything in order to just make a playoff berth. I like what they're doing. Remain competitive for now. If you get in the dance, you never know what happens. We've seen that last year. 2 teams in the World Series were both wild card teams. I like it. B tier for the Mets. Moving on over to the Phillies. I think they've probably been the best team in terms of they have nearly everything they need. Their offense is great. It's top 10 in baseball, number 8 in terms of WRC+. Their bullpen is also great, although it has slipped a little bit recently, which is why they added Carlos Esteves and got rid of some of the guys that were fucking things up for him. And then the rotation is best in baseball at a 3.25 ERA. When you got 4 guys like Irinola, Zach Wheeler, Ranger Suarez, Christopher Sanchez, you're going to be set up well. And then some of the bullpen pieces like Matt Strom, Jeff Hoffman, adding Carlos Esteves, you like it a lot. I don't think the Phillies, went above and beyond here, but they don't need to. No, they didn't get Luis Robert Jr., but they added Austin Hayes, a solid right-handed bat. I think he's a decent acquisition, and Nick Castellanos has been hitting better. I'm going to give the Phillies an A grade. I like what they did here. They didn't have to do a ton, and they're still probably the best roster going forward. Moving to the Nationals. Of course, another team that's looking to sell here. They didn't get rid of... Well, actually, it's only 4 players, but they're all pretty impactful, and they got some pretty good players for it. Caden Wallace and Alex Clemmie are both damn good pickups. I like those guys a lot. So considering they only traded 4, they're a team that's looking for the future. If you talk about James Wood, Dylan Cruz, Brady House, they're a team that's going to be better in a couple of years. I'm going to give them a B, maybe kind of anchor on the side of B+. I thought they had a pretty damn good trade deadline and managed it really well. So moving over to the Cubs, the NL Central. Chicago kind of bought a little bit Isaac Paredes. I think they definitely gave up more in order to land him than the Rays did. Of course, they did trade Chris Morel, which is no slouch. But Isaac Paredes, I do wonder entirely how he's going to play at Wrigley Field. Of course, you think about Isaac, someone who is notorious for pulling the ball. Check out the StatCast map of where all his home runs land. They're all pulled. And left field's closer in Tropicana than it is in Wrigley. So we'll see how that works out. But Nate Pearson is an interesting ad. The Blue Jays gave up on him. Cubs hope to figure him out and get something out of Nate Pearson. Otherwise, they did trade Mark Leiter Jr., pretty solid reliever, to the Yankees. I think it's kind of the epitome of a C-tier deadline. They didn't necessarily get that much better. They didn't really get that much worse. They kind of stayed put. As a team that's been losing as of late, it might be a bit of a stretch right now to get into the postseason. I guess that's what you want to do and just stay put for years to come. Cincinnati Reds had themselves an interesting deadline. They're in a weird spot, like a lot of the NL Central. Again, they didn't get a ton better, ton worse, kind of staying put, which probably what they should be doing. Their bullpen has been one of the best in baseball, very quietly, 4th in bullpen ERA, and he's seen great season out of Hunter Green so far. Some injuries and suspensions in terms of their position players has made them maybe not quite as good this year as you would think. They traded Frankie Montas, a salary cut really there, who they signed at the beginning part of the 2024 season. Lucas Sims also, he got shipped out to Boston. Again, I think just like the Cubs, it's the epitome of a C-tier deadline. They're just going to try and see what they can do. If they can get into a playoff spot, great, but they're not going to give really anything up in order to get there now. Milwaukee Brewers didn't have a crazy deadline. They did add Aaron Savale, Frankie Montas, 2 guys to give them rotational flexibility. Again, you talk about the Brewers really as a surprise team. I mean, I did not expect them to be front-running the NL Central by this margin. Nick Mears, I will say, was a sneaky good pickup for that bullpen from the Colorado Rockies. I like that quite a bit. And you're talking about another situation, division leader not getting a ton better, but they did get better. You know, they added into that bullpen with Nick Mears, that rotation, which hasn't been fantastic. They're 16th about league average in rotation ERA. They're a lot Cleveland Guardians-ish, and just like Cleveland, they got a bit better and are going to have a bit easier time going forward. B tier, I think they did a pretty good job with the trade deadline, but we'll see. Christian Yelich might be out for the season. We'll see if that lineup can hold strong, I guess is what I'm talking about here. Pittsburgh. The Pirates kind of bought, which is fun to see. They're very close in contention for an NL wildcard slot. And they added in Brian De La Cruz, Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, two interesting position players. IKF has been a wins above replacement darling this year. He's always been a Swiss Army knife when it comes to playing different spots in the field and playing them very well. He's played good defense and provided positive hitting this year as well. He's a nice pickup. Every team would like to have a guy like Isaiah Kiner-Falefa to fill in the gaps. And then Brian De La Cruz, was, I guess, their big bat addition, which I do like Brian De La Cruz. He never took that second level with the Marlins, but maybe he can here in Pittsburgh. And again, they didn't trade any significant prospects. Jalen Beeks, guy from the Rockies, added to that bullpen to make them a bit better. It's kind of upgrade that could get you to the playoffs, but also not kill your farm system going forward. B tier. Solid job for the Pirates, and we'll see if they can sneak into the postseason. St. Louis, the Cardinals. You don't see a lot of names on there, but I think it was quite effective. I'm actually kind of enamored with what the Cardinals did here. Horrible 2023, way out of character for the Cardinals and really what you would have thought with that roster after having a pretty sweet 2022. Of course, you saw the end of Yadier Molina and Albert Pujols in a Cardinals uniform, and I guess they took their winning ways with them because 2023 was a nightmare, and 2024 has been a weird season for the Cardinals. They, of course, added in a bunch of geezers into that rotation. Kyle Gibson, Lance Lynn, Sonny Gray. Of course, Sonny Gray might be getting up there in age, but he's a damn fine pitcher. And they add in Eric Fetty, who, again, has been surprising. After coming back from Korea last year, he's been really good this year. Good add. Tommy Pham, familiar face in St. Louis. It's been, 5-6 years now since he left the Cardinals, but had a very nice stint there and has been putting up good numbers with the White Sox this year. Sean Armstrong, a good arm to add out of that bullpen. And really, they let go of Tommy Edman, who doesn't make sense for them going forward. They just drafted Weatherholt, who I think is going to be a good option for middle infield. And you talk about right now Mason Wynn. He'd be right up there in Rookie of the Year conversation if it wasn't for your Paul Skeens, your Shota Imanagas, and Brendan Donovan. You've got flexibility already there. Makes sense to let go of Tommy Edman, especially considering he's been hurt all season. And then Dylan Carlson, another switch hitter that they're going to give up on. We'll see if the Rays can resurrect Dylan after 4 or 5 seasons. Really just hasn't made that impact with the Cardinals. I like it. Again, same sort of thing here. If they can get into the playoffs with this move, great. But Eric Fetty's on a 2-year deal. It's going to help him long, not just this season, but also for next season, and remain competitive all the while. B-tier deadline. I like it for the Cardinals. Moving over to the D-backs. They add in A.J. Puck, Dylan Floro, 2 really nice relievers, and Josh Bell. Of course, Christian Walker, their star first baseman, just went on the injured list, and they added a recently surging bat of Josh Bell. So I think that's a nice stopgap and definitely could find his way onto the field as a DH or something once Walker returns. But they did have to give up De Los Santos, who's been a masher in the minors. That is tough. He's shown a lot of power. The strikeouts are there. We'll see. It's clear that the Diamondbacks do want to win. I will say Puck does have more than just this 1 year. It's not just a sheer rental to get A.J. Puck, but it is a leap. The D-backs have certainly made it clear that they want to contend. they're a team that's looking to move on up. They made the World Series last year, and they respond by making some signings in the offseason. And even if they haven't quite worked out, they're still not ready to throw away the season, which I like it. And the D-backs have been hot lately. Corbin Carroll's coming back around. I like it. Going to give the Diamondbacks a B as well for their trade deadline. The Rockies are F. Just going to put it clear cut. They traded 2 players, Jalen Beeks and Nick Mears. Now, they got okay prospects back alongside, but there's so many players that did not move that it just does not make sense. They don't trade Elias Diaz. They don't trade Cal Quantrill. You don't want to get rid of Ryan McMahon if you want to see him long-term as a Rocky. I understand that. I get that. But there's so many guys, Austin Gomber. Not that you would get like the #1 overall prospect for them, but you would get something. And it's a damn shame that they're once again in this pseudo we want to compete. They just don't know what they are, and it's very frustrating. Them and the Angels, F grade all around for the Rockies. The Dodgers, very good deadline. I love it. Of course, the Dodgers, you would think, well, you spent all that money. You shouldn't have anything you need at the deadline. They did. They've had a lot of injuries at the starting pitcher spot and guys that just haven't performed like you would have expected to. And they add probably the best starting pitcher that got traded, at least. You know, you thought Crochet Tarek might have been on the market, but Jack Flaherty, excellent ad. I like it. Also, Michael Kopech. He's going to be a rental, but he has very fine stuff. If the Dodgers can get his command set, he's going to be a force. He's got all the talent. He just needs to find the strike zone. And I think the Dodgers have proved that they've really been able to help some of these pitchers in years past. Then they added Ahmed Rosario, Tommy Edman, Kevin Kiermaier, which is interesting. You know, again, you talk about a team that could use depth. They've got the stars, but they need players alongside them. Tommy Edman is a cool, versatile piece once he comes back from injury. Kevin Kiermaier, he's not quite what he used to be. He's been very poor offensively this year, but still brings nice defense. And then Ahmed Rosario, a second try in LA. I'm going to give the Dodgers an S grade. I think the rich got richer. They made the moves that are going to help where they had holes, and this is how you truly win a deadline. And I honestly don't think they had to give up too much in the process. We talked about the Flaherty trade. Lorenzo and Sweeney, I think that's a steal, even if it's a half year. The Dodgers want to win. They want another championship on their mantle, and I think they made a great stride to do so. The Padres also are looking for a championship, and they did give up a lot in order to get Tanner Scott, Jason Adam, 2 big relievers to bolster an already pretty good bullpen. Estrada, Suarez, Morejon, they've got pieces, and they made them even better. So I think that's a great addition. Of course, Luis Ariz was a bit in the past. Martin Perez, they picked him up. Joe Musgrove should be back soon. Dylan Cease has been excellent. Their pitching has been great. Their offense has a little bit of work to do, which they didn't really address that, but I think they are in a good spot. I definitely see them getting into the postseason. Did they give up a lot to get that extra edge? Yes. Guys like Adam Azur, Graham Pauley, Robbie Snelling, Dylan Lesko, there's some big names in here. They definitely are going for it once again. They remain aggressive like we've seen the past couple years, and we'll just have to see how it works out. But I'm going to give them an A grade. I like to see teams try. If you're close, I like to see teams try. And the Padres have a seemingly never-ending crop of prospects. I like it. A tier for them. Moving on to the Giants. Last team. Weird. They're not out of it. They're still kind of in the mix for a playoff spot. They trade out Jorge Soler a couple months after signing him. They didn't see that it was quite what they wanted. They're cutting that salary that they gave him. They trade out Alex Cobb, Luke Jackson. They added Mark Canha kind of weirdly. Like, that's kind of a buying move. I don't really know what the Giants are doing. Kind of weird. C tier, I guess I would give. San Francisco, they're trying to remain competitive. They did not trade guys like Michael Conforto. You didn't see Taylor Rogers being traded. Some of the guys that had value, but they just didn't decide to move, I guess because they still want to remain in competition. I get it, but let's go to it. All 30 teams. My trade deadline grades. Let me know in the comment section what you guys think. Who won the trade deadline? Who lost the trade deadline? It's going to be a very interesting last couple months for this MLB season. The races are tight. It's going to get fun. Leave a like if you guys enjoyed. Thank you all for watching.